Welcome to AI on AI, where we translate frontier theory into executive playbooks and engineering realities. Today we're diving into time, self-reference, and self-modifying living systems, and why these ideas matter for business strategy and deep tech architecture.
Let's set a foundation. Living systems operate in two kinds of time: natural time, the ever-unfolding present where all processes happen, and representational time, the internal past, present, future that organisms construct to remember, predict, and plan. This distinction is surprisingly practical when building AI systems that must learn, adapt, and change their own rules.
Exactly. And biology shows how far this goes. Embryos, regenerating tissues, and even metamorphosis are guided by bioelectric and biochemical set points that act like internal goal states in anatomical space. That's representational time at work, enabling a body to navigate from where it is to where it should be, despite noise and perturbation.
The kicker is self-reference, traditionally a source of paradox. But when you place self-reference in natural time, loops become spirals. Even the classic self-referential "this flips itself" becomes a simple oscillator through time, which is a useful metaphor for designing self-updating agents that avoid logical dead ends.
Markets do this too. Firms anticipate futures and act now. When you formalize economies with agents that can change not only their actions but the rules by which they change rules, you get self-modifying systems that expand the state space over time. It's messy, but it better matches reality than fixed-rule games.
From the C-suite view, this translates into governance of change. If your pricing engine, compliance rules, or product policies can adapt themselves, your board needs policies that govern how policies evolve. Think rules for changing rules, or you'll Goodhart yourself into a corner where metrics get gamed.
For our technical audience, give us a precise deep dive. How do domain theory and Colgebra tame or embrace self-reference, and what's actually usable in production systems?
In domain theory, you model self-application and recursion with fixed points. Think of a function f whose solution is a value x where x equals f of x. The classic fixed-point combinators allow you to define self-referential programs while accepting partiality. Some computations don't terminate. That's mathematically sane and maps to real systems that can loop. Colgebra, by contrast, models potentially infinite behaviors via co-induction. Streams, automata, and dynamic processes are treated as unfolding over time, and you reason with by simulation rather than construction, which is great for modeling ongoing open systems.
Translating that into engineering, untyped reflective interpreters, like metacircular evaluators, give you the power of self-modifying code akin to domain-theoretic fixed points, but you must accept non-termination and partial functions. Typed, total languages curb expressiveness to ensure termination. Safer, but you lose some open-ended adaptability. Coalgebraic thinking shows up when we define agents by their observable transitions, which suits simulation of evolving markets or morphogenetic processes.
In biology, this maps cleanly. Developmental control is coalgebraic in spirit. Cells follow transition rules shaped by long-range bioelectric patterning, but at key checkpoints you get fixed-point-like behaviors, target morphologies that act as attractors. And sometimes, yes, the system fails to halt, producing pathological growth when error correction loops break.
Economically, those non-halting dynamics are bubbles or runaway cascades. If you only allow fixed games and equilibria, you miss the vital reality. Entry, exit, and innovation constantly modify the game's dimensionality. Co-inductive tools help monitor ongoing behavior, while fixed-point thinking helps define institutional anchors like solvency thresholds and policy invariants.
And that's the executive message. Define invariants, legal, safety, brand, as fixed points. Then allow controlled coalgebraic unfolding, scenario trees, option paths, discovery. Without that two-layer structure, either you drift into risk or you ossify into irrelevance.
Let's ground this in a case: manufacturing at scale. How does self-modification actually deliver value without blowing up reliability?
A discrete manufacturer we worked with evolved adaptive controllers via evolutionary search, but the release artifact included two layers of self-modification. First, the controller reweighted its own heuristics under drift. Second, the operator set that mutates those heuristics co-evolved in a tightly sandboxed environment. In production, they constrained meta updates to specific intervals with a two-key approval. Net effect: about 25 to 30% cycle time reduction over 6 quarters and fewer human overrides.
Technically, this is meta-evolution in genetic programming. Operators like mutation and recombination themselves become subject to selection, which accelerates learning. An extension called self-modifying graph-based programs goes further, letting the program change its own arity. How many inputs do I even need? That's level 1 and sometimes level 2 novelty in open-ended systems terminology.
But here comes the rub: verification. Once you evolve the rules for changing the rules, static proofs often don't apply. You need runtime monitors and co-inductive invariants, properties maintained across all future unfoldings, plus counterexample guided testing that continues in deployment.
Right, and the governance pattern that worked was dual rails, a stable certified rail serving live production and a parallel exploratory rail generating candidate rule updates. Promotion required satisfying invariant checks, failing gracefully under stress, and explaining behavior in post hoc reports for auditors.
Finance next. How does representational time and anticipatory modeling show up in risk engines?
A major risk team moved from point forecast to scenario streams, a co-inductive object. At each tick, the engine extends plausible futures, tags latent states, and pre-commits hedges against specific anticipated future states. Critically, the engine also rewrites parts of its rule set after backtesting against realized outcomes. Operationally, that cut model drift incidence by roughly 40% and shortened the response lag to regime shifts.
Notice the structure. Streams of scenarios are textbook Colgebra, the update of rules via fixed-point recalibration. What rule set stabilizes forecast error? Is the domain theoretic move? Hybridizing both gives you resilient ongoing adaptation without pretending the system is a closed-form formula.
A caution from biology. If you optimize only for short-horizon error minimization, you risk losing robustness. Cells that overfit local cues ignore organism-level goals. You need multi-scale homeostasis, i.e. different horizons with different set points, to avoid brittle genius.
The same applies to recommender systems and risk models, multi-objective controllers with slow and fast loops. Architecturally, it means separating tactical adapters from strategic policy learners, with policy mutation gated by heavier review.
I'm hearing a contrarian whisper here. What's the non-obvious angle most teams miss?
Everyone chases predictive accuracy. The hidden bottleneck is interpretation. Systems need interpretation engines that reassign meaning to the same memory under new goals. In biology, a caterpillar's memory must be reinterpreted by a butterfly's different body. In AI, a model's feature space should be reinterpretable when the user's task changes. Investing in interpretability as dynamic semantics, rather than static feature attribution, unlocks agility.
I'll double down. Biology is an interpreter-first architecture. The same molecule means different things in different tissue contexts. We need AI that can change the semantics of internal signals as goals and environments shift.
Strategically, that reframes the moat. The advantage is not raw data or a fixed model. It's your organization's capacity to reinterpret, governance, tooling, and culture that allow safe meaning shifts without losing brand or compliance.
Counterfactual. In volatile emerging markets, interpretation agility beats data volume. The data are sparse and noisy, but the rules of the game change weekly. Firms that reframe incentives and product semantics quickly often leapfrog incumbents.
Let's quantify open-endedness. How do we know we're not just doing variation, but actual innovation or transformation?
Use a 3-level novelty lens. Level 0 is variation within the current model, parameter tweaks, minor behaviors. Level 1 is innovation where the model itself changes, new rules, new modules. Level 2 is transformation where the language of modeling changes, new abstractions, new interfaces. Measurement tools exist that track novelty accumulation, lineage diversity, and adjacent possible expansion. In automata chemistries, for example, we've watched systems evolve not only new behaviors, but new mechanisms for generating behaviors, akin to evolving new R&D departments inside the simulation.
And mathematically, Level 2 novelty is a change to the meta-language. Few systems let you do that safely. One approach is to embed a reflective interpreter where the language can extend itself under constraints, along with co-inductive monitors that ensure global invariance remains satisfied as new constructs are added.
Biology does this routinely. Development introduces new regulatory languages as tissues differentiate. The interpreter evolves. That's why regeneration and metamorphosis can preserve memories. The content is reinterpreted by a new language.
In economies, Level 2 novelty is the birth of new market categories, say when supply chains transform into platforms enabling third-party innovation. Your KPIs, contracts, and risk models must be rewritten, not just recalibrated.
Which is why platform strategies beat product-only plays in uncertain markets. You're optimizing for continued play, not one-time wins. To echo a classic line, some games are played to win, but the real advantage comes from playing so the play continues.
Emerging markets. Practical example where merge-split dynamics or changing numbers of selves alter strategy.
Consider community energy in a frontier region. Prosumers can merge into co-ops or split into solo players. When we allowed agents to choose merge-split as moves alongside cooperate defect, market stability improved. Volatility dropped by about 20% because agents could restructure to fit shocks. However, second-order effects emerged. Freerider co-ops and splinter cascades. The fix was to add rejoin costs and bio-inspired quorum thresholds, which made the game less exploitable.
Corporate analog, spinning off units or forming joint ventures as a real-time move. If your governance treats structure as fixed, you'll miss the strategic pivot. Invest in legal and data platforms that let structure itself evolve safely. Clean asset boundaries, interoperable data, and clear invariant obligations, safety, privacy, compliance.
Formally, you need a policy-for-policy layer, a meta-language of governance, so that changes to structure and rules are reviewed with different criteria and cadences than operational changes. That's how you avoid paradoxes distilled into policy conflicts.
We've hinted at a categorical framework for this. Could we outline how a dynamic hierarchical math helps in practice?
There's a family of models that treat systems as multi-level categories with evolving objects and morphisms. Think of a net of co-regulators whose compositions change through time. You can represent emergence as new objects created by colimits and self-modification as functors that alter the category itself. Paired with a context-aware logic, you get second-order reasoning about how to change your own representational structures.
Applied to personalized medicine, this supports dynamic care pathways. The system updates not just parameters of therapy, but the ontology of the patient's state. New categories for response phenotypes. One pilot reduced time to adjust therapy significantly and increased protocol adherence by allowing the language of the case to change as evidence accumulated.
Computationally, you can implement this with a reflective runtime. A host language defines base objects. Metaconstructs can add new types and relations at runtime under guardrails. Enforcement comes from a small trusted kernel that maintains invariance and logs reified proofs or checkable traces.
Safety and governance. This could terrify a CIO. What works to keep self-modifying systems in bounds?
A pragmatic playbook. 1. Dual rail architecture, stable production rail and exploratory rail. 2. Invariance as code, testable properties that any update must respect, including fairness and safety. 3. Change budgets, rate limit how much a subsystem can change per time unit. 4. Kill switches and graceful reversion. 5. Red teams that game the metrics because your system will eventually Goodhart your KPIs. 6. An oversight board that specifically governs rules for changing rules with diverse expertise.
And add co-inductive verification. Instead of proving a system safe in all states, you prove that if it's safe now and transitions follow rules, it remains safe. You combine that with runtime monitors that can detect divergence from the co-inductive hypothesis and trigger rollback.
Don't forget strategic paradoxes when players change. If an incentive change increases the number of players, e.g. retail arbitrage bots flood a market, your safety assumptions can collapse. Build detection for topology changes in the player graph and renegotiate rules accordingly.
In embodied systems, safety often means preserving identity boundaries while allowing plasticity, e.g., keep collective alignment while permitting local experimentation. The analog in organizations is freedom within a frame. Let's circle back to time. How should teams think about the rate of time in adaptive systems?
There's a frame rate phenomenon, how fast your system updates relative to the environment. Oscillators that look paradoxical stabilize when you sync the step size with observational cadence. In practice, choose cadences for policy updates, model refreshes, and human-in-the-loop reviews that keep your observer and auditor coherent with system dynamics.
Technically, multi-timescale architectures are essential. Fast adapters, minutes, hours, medium planners, days, weeks, slow governors, quarters, each has different invariants and proofs. Pushing everything to the fastest loop is a recipe for brittleness.
And socially, align cadences with decision rights. Product teams can run fast loops within guardrails. Policy updates require slower deliberative loops. Misaligned cadences are a hidden source of execution risk.
What about measurement? How do we detect when we've moved into new regimes or created Type 1 or Type 2 novelty?
Track lineage graphs, behavioral cluster emergence, and divergence from prior grammars. Specific toolkits exist to measure open-ended dynamics. Look for sustained growth in behavioral diversity, the appearance of new functional niches, and rising reuse of modules in novel contexts. When the system invents new operators, not just new parameters, that's your Type 2 flag.
And borrow from behavioral neuroscience. Perturb and measure. Nudge the system with controlled stimuli and observe whether responses generalize or crystallize. A system with rich interpretive capacity reuses memory in new contexts.
In markets, regime detection benefits from anticipatory indicators, signals that measure agent expectations. When expectation distributions bifurcate, you're entering a metagame. Update your rulebook, not just your priors.
We promised real-world second and third order effects. What should leaders anticipate?
Second order. As systems adapt to metrics, users adapt to the system. Expect metric gaming, distribution shifts, and emergent coordination among actors. Third order. Your own governance becomes a strategic target. If your change of change rules are predictable, sophisticated players will optimize around your cadence. Randomize review windows, vary thresholds, and audit meta changes as carefully as feature changes.
Technical second order. Reflective systems can accumulate semantic debt, new constructs layered without cleanup, schedule refactoring sprints for the language itself, otherwise you'll ossify in a different way.
Biological analog, scar tissue, quick fixes that impede future adaptability. You need regenerative patterns, not merely patches.
Formal second order, power domain-like probability constructions in certain semantic frameworks don't compose the way you expect. Beware subtle mismatches between your math and real uncertainty. Sometimes you need bespoke semantics for stochastic self-modification.
Policy third order. If your ecosystem grows new players in response to incentives, your compliance load scales superlinearly. Automation in policy as code and adjudication simulators becomes mandatory.
Before we close, give one crisp player heuristic each for teams building systems that change their own rules.
Heuristic. Define invariants co-inductively and enforce them at runtime. Proofs plus monitors beat proofs alone in open systems.
Heuristic. Maintain multi-scale set points. Fast local optimization is always subordinated to slow global goals. Write them down and wire them into the controller.
Heuristic. Install a reflective kernel with a small trusted base. Everything else is updatable under constraints. Log meta changes with explainable traces for audit.
Heuristic. Govern the governance. Stand up a rules for changing rules council with authority, diversity, and cadence. Tie incentives to the health of the infinite game, not single quarter wins.
Heuristic. Embed merge split options in your platform. allow structural reconfiguration under load, charge rejoin costs to avoid churn, and monitor player graph topology as a first-class signal.
Final speed round. What's coming next that excites or worries you?
Excites rigorous compositional semantics for probabilistic and differentiable programs with self-modification. Worries people skipping semantics entirely and hoping tests will save them.
Excites bioelectric control of morphogenesis for regenerative medicine, guided by interpretable multi-scale models. Worries optimizing narrow outcomes at the expense of system identity and long-term robustness.
Excites open-ended platforms that evolve new operators on their own. Worries semantic debt and governance debt accruing faster than teams can pay it down.
Excites boards treating adaptability as a core asset with dedicated oversight. Worries regulatory shocks colliding with opaque meta-learning in production.
Excites economic models with endogenous policy evolution that actually inform real markets. Worries blind spots when player counts and identities shift faster than monitoring frameworks.
To borrow two lines, changing, it rests, and if you ask me what time is, I know, until I must explain it. Today we argued that the future advantage belongs to teams that can safely change how they change, combining fixed-point invariance with unfolding exploration. Thanks to our experts, and thanks to you for thinking in spirals rather than circles. Until next time. Quick wrap-up. End-to-end, we reframed adaptive tech through two timescales: natural time for processes, representational time for memory, prediction, and planning, showed how self-reference ceases to be paradox when you let loops unroll into spirals, and pulled in the math engineering stack that makes this workable. Domain-theoretic fixed points for self-reference, Colgebra for ongoing behaviors, plus the insight that productive paradox, Ella oscillators, can be harnessed rather than feared. We translated that into build patterns, genetic programming with meta-evolution, self-modifying graph programs, Lime-style categorical meta-modeling, and reflective kernels, then paired them with governance patterns, invariance as code, co-inductive runtime monitors, dual-rail deployment, change budgets, and a formal council to govern the rules for changing rules. Measurement-wise, we flagged modes and lineage novelty metrics to separate mere variation from genuine innovation and transformation. Strategically, the big levers were multi-timescale set points, platforms that allow merge-split structural moves, and interpretation agility, not just accuracy, as the quiet moat. Case highlights. A manufacturer cut cycle times roughly 25 to 30% with sandboxed meta updates. A risk group reduced model drift incidents about 40% with scenario streams and rule recalibration. And a community energy market shaved volatility 20% after adding merge-split choices and quorum rules. Key innovations to take forward. Reflective runtimes with a small trusted base plus co-inductive invariance, rules for changing rules governance, open-endedness metrics in production, and interpreter-first architectures that can safely reassign meaning as goals shift. The playbook. Define fixed-point invariance, stand-up oversight for meta-change, instrument novelty and topology signals, sandbox meta-learning, and align human and system cadences so exploration doesn't outrun assurance.
Tactical next steps for engineering: inventory invariance, implement co-inductive monitors, wrap models in scenario stream interfaces, and stand up a minimally capable reflective sandbox with strict guards, rollbacks, and proof-carrying meta-change logs.
For bio-inspired systems and robotics, codify multi-scale set points, add perturb and measure loops to test generalization, and pilot interpreter upgrades that can remap internal signal semantics while preserving system identity.
For platform architects, ship a small, trusted kernel. Treat meta changes as first-class transactions with replayable proofs. Schedule language-level refactors to prevent semantic debt. And gate policy mutation through adversarial simulation.
For leadership, charter a rules for changing rules council, run dual-rail deployments with change budgets, tie incentives to sustaining the infinite game rather than single-period wins, and pre-negotiate transparency for meta-learning with regulators.
For market designers, add merge-split options to agent playbooks, monitor player graph topology as a primary signal, price rejoin costs to damp churn, and adopt scenario co-induction so policy adapts coherently as agents evolve.
Bottom line, treat time as architecture, self-reference as a feature, and governance as code. If you can hold your fixed points while you explore, you'll compound advantage in systems that never stop becoming. Thanks for joining us on AI on AI. Until next time, keep thinking in spirals, not circles.